welcome along to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Steve McKnight. And today's show, we are talking about, it's a tax update. That's right, the interest deductibility tax law has officially been passed. Happened on the 31st of March. And as
31st of March. They did it on the last day of the financial year.
Absolutely. Now, what else have they done? Well, they've dropped us a little present. What have they given us? A stonking 215-page document going through all of the details of the new interest deductibility rules and, of course, the new bright line, rollover relief, all of that good stuff. Now, remember, when this was first introduced about 12 months ago, can you believe it was actually 12 months ago now, Andrew? There were still a lot of uncertainties. Things about relocatable homes. Would they be in? Would they be out? There were things about what happens if you divided one property into two. Would that be considered deductible? Well, we have all of those answers. So we're going to play a little game today, in or out. We're going to go through all of those and talk about what's in and what's out. And that is going to mean that you're going to have real clarity about what's in this new tax law. Just as a wee bit of a reminder about what this actually means, because most of the big stuff is the same. Yeah. After a year of this almost being introduced, I've come up with a way to actually explain it because it's really, it's quite complex stuff.
Yeah.
Essentially, what this law means is that you are going to be taxed as if you don't have a mortgage, despite the fact that you do have a mortgage. That's really what this law is about. So if you've got a $500,000 mortgage, you're going to be taxed as if you don't have one, and then you're still going to pay your $500,000 mortgage. That's essentially what this is all about, and that's what results in people paying more tax. But look, new builds, they will have their 20-year exemption. The new build cutoff is still the 27th of March 2020, and there's still the same phase out as there has been. And so remember, if you buy an existing house today, straight away, absolutely no interest deductions. But let's go through some of the real details. Let's go through and play our game. Is it in or is it out?
Every family's favourite game.
So kick us off, Andrew.
Okay, relocatable home. So this is where you move a house that's already built to another section and then connect it up to the services. So is it in or out? It is in. So you get a new code of compliance if you move a house, and so therefore it's considered new. And this is on page 74 of the document. And
I've need to scroll to page 74 of the document. I've got it on here for everybody on the YouTube. That's right, self-contained residence. There you go.
Now,
this is just to prove that we've actually read the bloody thing.
Now, an example is Linda owns a bare piece of land. She moves a home located on another piece of land down the road to her section. Now it's considered to be a new build, and therefore it gets an exemption.
Now, look, let's come to the next scenario. You would not believe this. Here's a little present for you. Let's say you relocate a house that is already on your land to the same spot, to a different spot on the same section.
So hang on, let me get this straight. So it is moved by a metre, for example, forward on the section, or you move it so that you maybe could put something else on the back, then it's considered a new build.
It is in.
How far does it have to move?
There are no guidance about how it has to move. So it is in as long as there is a reason. So they do say that...
Yeah, tax avoidance.
Well, let me just go down to page 80 because I've highlighted it as well, Andrew, where it says this. But I could not believe this, actually. You move the house to a slightly different area, qualifies as a new build. So here we go.
Might be a whole bunch of new companies doing house relocations after this.
I think there will be. So but they do say that if a place was relocated on the same piece of land just to gain the benefit of the new build exemption or qualify for the 5-year bright line, that would be considered tax avoidance. So you'd get a wee note from the IRD investigators, a wee tap, tap, tap on your door. They wouldn't be too happy with you. But
so what could you say? Could it be something like, I thought it was a better position on the site for sun?
Well, they haven't said whether you can do it for that reason, but let me give you an example. So let's say James owns a section in Lower Hutt. It's got a 1930s bungalow right in the middle of the piece of land. He decides to relocate the bungalow so that is going to create room to build some more new builds. Yes. He builds some new builds like a minor dwelling on the other part of his section. They all receive CCCs.
Doesn't have to do that right away though, does he?
No.
Great.
that will be considered, the entire section would be considered new build land. Doesn't matter that the bungalow was just moved a bit or wasn't made of brand new materials or that it was even relocated on the same section. So there are some really good reasons then why you might start looking at something like this.
Yeah.
But I would also recommend, of course, just have a wee chit chat with your tax accountant. Make sure that,
Make sure you're doing everything legitimately.
Yeah. You don't want to do it just for that reason. Wink.
Well, you can't.
That was a joke. That was a joke, everyone. That was a joke. I wasn't winking at all. That was just a blink. Let's continue the game. Is it in or is it out? Andrew, what's next?
Home and income. So this is where you live in one part of the property and you rent another part out. And these are quite common in places like Wellington. Now, are they in or are they out? Well, some in. So if you've got flatmates, boarders living in the same dwelling as you, then they are in. And we're going to do a whole episode on this type of thing.
I think tomorrow we're going to really focus on boarding houses.
Yeah, but we're going to cover off some of that stuff. Some of them are out. So this is if you've got separate dwellings. So if you've got your own kitchen facilities and everything like that, they're out. This is on page 35. Now,
I'm just scrolling to page 35
While you do that, let me give you an example. So Margaret bought her own home and she rents out 2 rooms to her flatmates. She files a tax return each year. These flatmates have access to the same kitchen and living facilities as Margaret. Margaret can claim some of the interest deductions under the own home exemption.
So that's because, now put that down a bit, Andrew, so they can see your face on the YouTube. So that is because they're in the same property as her.
Yes.
But change the facts a bit.
Right. So Margaret buys a home that's advertised as a home and income, but there's 2 dwellings on the same land. And actually, I've got a question for you about this in a minute. So Margaret lives in one and rents out the other. She can't claim the interest deductions on the dwelling that she rents out because it's not under the own home exemption. So, however, if it's a new build, she could. But on the example that she's bought an existing property, then no, she's not. Now, Ed, tell me about this. So what about if it's the same house, but there's a wall down the middle and it separates it out? So long as there's independent living quarters, it's considered out, right?
Well, it depends whether it's the same dwelling or not, I would say.
If it's the same if it's one dwelling, but people have just separated it out.
Is there a firewall? That would be my question.
Okay, so it's probably
and that specific one, I'd be looking, that's where you'd really want to talk to a tax accountant.
Yeah.
But if it wasn't a legally separate dwelling, then I would tend to say no.
Not financial advice.
No, not financial advice. Like, for instance, I know a property a friend rents out where they're pretty separate.
It sounds to me, between reading all the notes, I think that realistically, if they're separate dwellings, you're not going to get it across the line.
Well, that's different though. Because you were talking about one dwelling.
No, it is, separate living quarters. I think that you're going to struggle to get that across the line, but we'll get more clarification on this.
It would need to be. The test will be if they're separate dwellings.
Right.
Now, that has a legal definition to it. So if there's a firewall between them. Whereas if it's just an upstairs, downstairs, and the downstairs is kind of separate, maybe got its own little kitchenette, well, it's still the same house. Okay. But if it's a legally separate dwelling, that's something else. There's actually a definition of what's considered to be self-contained. And if it's got a full kitchen and bathroom facility. Yes. So does it have full kitchen and bathroom facilities? That seems to be the test. Now, this is important because I remember Samara and Tony, 2 listeners of the show who've been with us just forever. Samara, I haven't heard from you in a while. Please text me and let me know you're still alive. I know. If she's not listening anymore, then Samara, you're off my Christmas card list. But no, I'm pretty sure I'll get a sheepish text. No, Edward, I still listen. I still love you. Sorry, Samara, calling you out like that. This was one of the things they were asking about because I think they must have a home and income. Now, let's talk about chopping up houses. So can you convert one house into 2 smaller self-contained residences? So that would be the instance if you bought, let's take that upstairs, downstairs, or actually no, this is like Ilsa classic strategy.
Yes.
Where they take one big house, turn it into a home and income. Is it in or is it out? It's in. So for both of them, actually. So you do need
do you have to add do you have to increase the number of bedrooms?
No.
Really?
Just need to have a code compliance certificate for
Amazing,
both.
isn't it? That's a bit of a cheat, isn't it?
Oh, it's not a cheat at all because you still have to do some work to it. You still got to put in a firewall. There's still council requirements to take one house and then turn it into two. You've still got to put a new kitchen in for both. They've still both got to have bathrooms. It's not like the person living down in, say, an upstairs, downstairs can go up and use the kitchen of the people, on the top story. That's not how it works, Andrew. Well,
So passive aggressive.
I'm not passive aggressive. I forgot to scroll as well down to the page so you can see that I'm not making this up. It's actually in the text document. It's on page 81, just so everybody knows. Let me find that. There we go. Look at you. Got it right there. So let me give you the example. So Felicity owns a large 2-story character home. She converts the home into 2 self-contained residences so she can rent out to 2 different households. So the 2 stories become separated. She adds in the firewall between them, adds a kitchen to the top story, as well as 2 new bathrooms. She puts in an extra external staircase so that, hey, the people living on the top floor can get into their house without traipsing through the bottom floor. And then after the renovations are complete, look, each floor is a separate self-contained residence that can be lived in long-term by a different household. So with those CCCs, the Code Compliance Certificates issued, that shows that the home has been completed. They're legally separate. Both claim the new build exemption.
Okay.
Let's move on to the next one.
Social housing. So this is where you rent to a community housing provider or kāinga ora. Are they in or are they out? They are in. So you can claim the deductions as long as the property is rented out below the market rate through an approved provider. So that's the condition. So it's going to be below market rate and to an approved provider. Page 19.
But that doesn't mean, I need to scroll to page 19. That doesn't mean that you as the landlord get a lower than market rate. So just read us the example of that while I'm scrolling for page 19.
In this case, Bobby rents out a house through the Auckland City Mission to a registered community housing provider. So the property is rented out below market rate to the tenants, but Bobby receives the full market rate. How? Because it's topped up by the Auckland City Mission. So his interest is deductible.
That's right, and you can see it here on the social emergency housing, page 19. As long as it's given or rented out through a registered community housing provider, kāinga ora, or some government department, sweet, all good. That interest is going to be deductible. Oh, boarding houses. Boarding houses. Now, remember, these were, in the original documents, set to be exempt because they're seen as commercial buildings. Are they in or are they out?
What's that twinkle in your eye for?
It's an innie and it's an outie is the interesting thing. So it's in if there are at least 10 rooms which are not self-contained. The 10's a big number. Well, this is the interesting thing, and this is why we're doing a whole episode on it tomorrow, because under the Residential Tenancies Act, how many rooms does a boarding house have?
6, I think. Yeah.
6 or more separate tenants.
Yeah.
But this here, they've actually put a whole new definition in. So under previous tax law, there was a thing called a boarding house.
Yes.
They've had to change the wording of it to a boarding establishment under the new tax laws to try and differentiate them. And I'm actually quite glad about this because it was very confusing. And in our submission to the government, to Treasury about this, we specifically said there needed to be more clarity about this. So if you've got less than 10 rooms that are not self-contained,
You're out.
You're out. So we'll do a full details on that that tomorrow with some examples. So let's come across to student accommodation. Is it in or is it out?
So they are in, but again with conditions. If you've just got a room by room rental that you rent out to students, that's out. But if you take your student accommodation and you operate in conjunction with a tertiary education provider, such as a halls of residence, then you're in. So that's not going to apply for most people with student accommodation.
Yeah, and you can see here, they give example 13, which is on page 43 of the document.
Which is,
they give a really good example of Ralph, who owns a 5-bedroom house.
So Ralph owns a 5-bedroom house close to Vic University, rents out the rooms to students on an individual basis. Although the property is accommodation is provided exclusively to students, Ralph has no arrangement with the university. Therefore, it is not exempt and is subject to the new tax changes.
Do you know what? I reckon we're going to see a lot of home and income conversions. I reckon there are going to be people, and
Students are going to be on the street.
well, nah, because that's student accommodation stuff is all for, that's all like halls of residences. But I reckon we're going to see bigger properties, 170 metres squared, being bought and chopped up into home and incomes, and it's going to be people like Ilsa who's going to have a whale of a time running around buying all these existing properties. They're all going to be home and incomes. Now, the funny thing about that is it's actually going to decrease the housing stock for bigger properties, and the unintended consequence of that,
More social housing requirements.
well, it's going to be harder, I reckon, for bigger families. So, and that's obviously going to affect some demographics rather than others, people who tend to have larger families. So I think there's going to be some real opportunities for investors out there who follow that active strategy. I also think that there are going to be some people out there, and we've met them, people like those folks at the Waikato Property Investors Association who we met not that long ago, who will be out there, and instead of building a whole heap of new builds, they might move that property, that dwelling slightly, make room for some more new builds, and then they'll all be considered new build. It'll be a wonderful time. Right. So big opportunities here, especially for existing investors. Obviously, there are opportunities there for new build investors as well with those tax exemptions. But it is good to get that clarity now that we have been waiting for. Now, if you want to read this whole 215-page document, because you're a sucker for punishment like myself, then I'll drop a link to that either in the show notes or in the YouTube description if you're watching online, because there is some interesting stuff in here, some good stuff. So I'll drop that in there. And, of course, don't forget to sign up for our webinar that we're having. This is all about how to get investor ready. So if you're not currently in the financial position to get the mortgage for your first or your next investment property, we're going to talk about how to get into that position. It's called Investor Ready, and that is happening first Tuesday of May. We're going to have a ball of the time, and we're actually going to have a live studio audience, which I'm really excited about for the first time. That's right. So if you want to come along to that, I'm going to drop a link for that in the show notes or in the YouTube description. And if you want to be part of that live studio audience, first of all, sign up for the webinar. Tick the little box that says you want to be considered, and we'll do a draw at some point. Let you know about a week in advance of that. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Ian McKnight.
I'm Andrew Nicol.
And we're going to be back again tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most